Welcome, everyone, to the recording of what is presently titled Welcome to TLC, or This Little Corner, not the Learning Channel. Um, uh, but I think because I was thinking like you guys probably wouldn't want to do it, and then I was thinking it's right that we do it because you both deserve saving throws against my mind control. And so what we do on my channel is savings throws versus mind control. You base your savings throw on either survival, social, wisdom, or heart. And if it's over 10, you take half damage from the mind control that follows. If it's under 10, you take full damage from the mind control that follows. Choose. Survivalists with an 11.
Ooh.
Socialists. Nat 1. That's a fumble, so it's even worse than not making it. You might go spread my mind control after this or something. And lovers of wisdom, 7. And lovers of heart, 16. So depending on your choices.
All right.
So,
let the mind control begin.
You're an amphibian. The lot of you. And actually, we're in this double amphibian phase. Because now we're also cyborg amphibious. Like right now, we are meeting in a place that doesn't exist and exchanging things that heretofore in the history of humanity could only be exchanged in person. And while we don't have the full range of those things, it's weird. And so this virtual so in this new amphibious space where there is a corner, and Paul, I really like your new staves thing with regard to that. That's my impression of what's going on and where we're at. How about from each of you? Start with Sevilla.
So the question is where we're at now, or
this place that we're in right now.
Yeah.
What is it to you? How would you describe it to someone who hadn't heard of the internet? Or just what are your thoughts and feelings about this virtual meeting?
Well, this particular corner, it's certainly become a community. And it's become like a Venn diagram type community where, people are kind of related from afar and then right in the center, depending on where you are. So, there's degrees of separation, but everything kind of, like for our little corner, everything kind of constellates around Paul, John Vervaeke, and Jonathan Pageau, with a lot of earlier influence of Jordan Peterson, I think, is really the way to put it. And I think everyone is pretty much aware, is obviously aware of that. But it's sort of interesting where it's going. Like some of the people who are more peripheral are really coming to the fore, and like Karen's channel, that's the one that really, I think that the fact that this little corner has given birth to something like Karen's channel, which begins with an interest in Jordan Peterson and an interest in you three, and then goes off into the arena of physics and how physics and science itself are related to religion. And she's finding, these scientists who have some spiritual bent, and they end up being extremely, ultimately influential. And it's really great to see that happening. It's really great to bring in the science into this little corner, because one thing I think that makes this corner very interesting is it's not specifically about it's about spiritual pursuit, I guess you could say, in a lot of ways, but that spiritual pursuit can come through science as well. And the science is integrating in a way that people like Jonathan Pageau, he's actually becoming interested in cognitive science because it helps him explain what he's trying to explain in a way that everyone can understand. So the way that this is all coming together, I think, is really beautiful and really informative as to where we need to go next, because we don't know, in the world right now, we don't know. So that's my take on it.
think it's excellent. I see. So Jordan sort of, pulled a lid off something in some ways and showed us, at least showed me, before Jordan Peterson, YouTube was something there might be a link to, or maybe something I wanted to go out and look at. But Jordan sort of pulled the lid off the fact that you could have 2+ hours of content and eventually conversation that that had and deserved a sustainable audience. But I think what has happened in this little corner, and I think part of I'm not a great artist like Peugeot. I'm not a scientist like Vervaeke. My emphasis has been, I think, to invite people to see each other and to help this not be, we all watched Jordan, and YouTube is sort of a one-dimensional thing. We watch these screeings, these beings of light on the screen, and okay, and that's a consumptive thing. And what I very much wanted to see is, can this go two ways? And like you said, Sevilla, the what I sometimes call the sub channels, which isn't probably a great name because it's a little too hierarchical for my taste. But Karen's channel, Griz's channel, Jacob lately has been, I think, doing some innovation that's been helping the community. Obviously, the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, and the contributions that has made, and other Discord servers. But I think part of what we're seeing is that Discord is a tool for some things, but maybe not as good a tool for other things. And I think what we do long for is a degree of community and, obviously, remember, embody, participation, and virtually not alone. I mean, these are the themes of Griz's channel, are really central to this. So there is sort of this, early on I called it shipping, which was a word that I learned from my teenage kids back when they were teenagers. So-and-so ships so-and-so. And it's like, what are you talking about, ships? No, they're just imagining these little relationships between people in their own minds. And what we're doing is building, communities are built up of relationships, and it's very complex because you learn this in a church, obviously. Not everybody has a really loving, harmonious relationship with everybody else, even in a small church. But
Mark has a channel called Navigating Patterns.
And Grim has a Patreon. Oh, that's right. But we get these little memes arise around each other. Hopefully they're good-hearted. And we get to know each other. And that's why, I think the Thunder Bay event, the German festival event, these in-person events, and for me, Estuary is a part of this, because as long as this stuff stays virtual, it's going to be hollow in a way. And but we are bumping up against a Dunbar number that we can only have levels of relationships with certain amount of people, partly because our limitations of time and space. So I think this little corner has been about trying to find a culture of relationships that, it's obviously over common interest, over common concern, but then it can go deeper than that. And so the friendships that I've seen develop, so I got a fair amount of grief because, Jacob is anti-Christian in the way that he is. And Father Stephen DeYoung was, dismissive of Calvinists the way he was. And, part of me chooses to not take too much offense to such things intentionally because, and then that last night, Father Eric was doing a Just Chatting thing on Jacob's channel. And
the
had
Federaci
some other
Media Network. Yes.
Yeah. And so, and I also know that in many ways, these relationships have become multi-dimensional. So Jacob isn't just really critical of the Apostle Paul. he's also extremely, and that came out in the conversation, extremely affirming of Christianity and Islam because of his whole construction of Noahide religion. And so what I've seen is a multidimensionality grow in the relationships here. That means that Paul Vander Klay isn't just, someone who is promoting Calvinism on a channel and taking on atheists, but there's multidimensionality to our relationships.
Let's see if I can talk for a minute. There's, I see, I've lived in video games. I've the guy who climbs up all the different pyramids I've built is for being dropped into completely new environments, learning the controls, yada yada. I'm coming out of the video games and seeing this as one, because that's how I learn. That's how I approach things. And like, I think that not everybody sees how this is a playground, but like, okay, so I want to try to make it a narrative, a little like what. Here's how it came to me. I was in a similar where like people, you start recognizing people in chats of live streams and in the comment sections, and that's the community that you start to sense. And then I was in one that was watching truther stuff, like everybody's lying to you. Here's how, blah, 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 blah. And I followed that to that ended up somehow with me watching the Sorting Myself Out channel because of the influence Peterson had on my algorithm. And so I get into that, and that became there was drama in the channel. The channel itself was arcing. There was a character progression of the channel, just like you could watch how your stuff has evolved over time, Paul. And at that point in time was like right when Peterson had dropped off. So like the algorithm had ran out of Peterson to feed stuff, so the algorithm started feeding all the Peterson people all these derivative channels, and it became this like donut community. And then those channels started crossing over, like in comic book series. Like Pajot's people got to meet Vervaeke, and it's like most of the people watching YouTube and our society in general, thanks to the worship of Set, has been programmed for binge watching evolving relationships. And like, now that the internet is here, and while we still have it, it's participatory. Like, I've colonized the bejesus out of some pastor's head in Sacramento, and his stuff broadcasts out to how many different other minds and spreads all over the world. And it's it's participatory in a way that we're not trained for, because we're used to the fourth wall. And so, despite the fact that I'm me getting up here and doing it shows everybody else that this is a playground and you can come play. And that is how I think I am of service to this corner of the internet.
Well, there's another way I want to mention that you're of service, and you do have a way of seeing kind of like the big picture underlying structure of what's happening. Exactly the way you just described that. I mean, it's brilliant. You've got a sensibility of the ebbs and flows underneath the surface, and then you describe it sort of in a semi-comical, semi-cryptic way, and you kind of make us aware of ourselves. And that's what I think you really, among many other things, that's one thing you really do contribute to this corner.
I very much agree. You've got, I think about it because again, the church is sort of the main framework that I come to this stuff through. I think of it in terms of, in the church, we talk about spiritual gifts. I mean, part of your gift in this little corner of the internet is doing what you just did, that you bring a particular perspective that I haven't had. I wasn't raised on video games. I wasn't a YouTuber. For the most part, the internet was something that I used, the most community I had on the internet was through a list serve. And you might think, well, how on earth can you have a community through a chain of emails? But that's what a listserv is. It's for those of you who are too young to know what a listserv is. That was community on the internet before we had social media. But it was also very long form, and I had maintained that for about 25 years. But your insight into the social dynamics of an entire, not insignificant generation is tremendously helpful for me. And I see that in what you do on your channel, all your little, all these little games that you're playing, is really helpful for me to better understand this world out there that myself, as a kind of a tweener, I'm right on the cusp between a boomer and an Xer. I I see that better through you than I've seen through just about anybody.
I want to say part of the reason there's the fact that Sevilla's what is it, the corner christener, um, then there was this part in a video recently where it's like we're adding Pajot's brother's book to the canon.
Mhm.
And there is a canon, and that is still very ephemeral. And I think as we're working on this welcome to the community, here's the onboarding process. It's those kind of things that I think will help, because like when a new person gets brought in for whatever reason, they're gonna land on one person, and they're gonna be like, who are all these other people they're talking about? And like they'll find you and they can play along with homeroom right away. I mean, but like a week of watching.
You christened that, and I thought that was genius.
It feels like it. It's I'm I've continually tried to build this beholder thing. You can see it on the video, but you kind of already have one, and it's that. I was talking about Sevilla.
I don't know what you mean by a beholder. I mean, I only played Dungeons and Dragons for about 3 years in my life, and that was in the 1980s. So that's a long time ago for me, Grizz.
Okay,
I'm impressed that you. I'm impressed.
it's a big. There's one on the screen for everybody, not you. It's a giant eyeball with little eye stalks that come out.
Mhm.
And like, so you have people that come to you with like, "Hey, Paul, I watched this. You should see it." Hey, Paul, and that's essentially like we're all around a campfire, and the guys go out hunting clips. Not I'm gender biased, whatever. To go out hunting clips, and they bring back. You should check this out. You should check this out.
Yeah.
And I think to the extent we can recognize that as a process and start, like all we can like here's a group of people who only bring 1 minute clips that they've pulled from other stuff that they think Paul should see. Everybody on the Discord will emoji it, and the top 3 will actually get his attention because dude's busy. He's got a church to run. Sorry, now back to Sevilla. I think what Persig brings about the social layer is terribly vital to the people participating in the corner, maybe just at consumptive level still, maybe in the comment level or whatever. But that layer is invisible to a whole spectrum of people who have been isolated. Like, you basically disconnect from your body and astral project into your screen onto the internet. And that disconnection, like, they have a sociality, but it's foreign to it's like it makes regular the stuff that you guys grew up immersed in and is normal and is ubiquitous like water to everybody who didn't grow up on the internet. It's like an invisible thing to them. And so that's other than that you christen the corner, you determine the cam, and everybody defers to you like you're some kind of queen mysteriously. that you're bringing that is really valuable to me, and I wanted to express that appreciation.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that I mean I think that really is what and I appreciate that. That's very, very kind. I think that that's something we don't really think about is that, ephemeral thing we call the social level. Because, I mean, we're under the presumption, this was the whole Persick's whole thing, we're under the presumption in general in society that eventually there's going to be a particle that's going to answer everything. And that's a pure material intellect connection that dismisses the entire, what Jonathan Pageau would say, the value that science, the value, i.e. religion, that science is nested in. Our whole understanding of anything at all is based on the fact that we understand it together. And that we're resting on, thousands of years of that kind of social development to even get to this point at all.
And it's fracturing.
Well, I think one of the things we learned in COVID, even though we all knew at a certain level that COVID was, this gets really, I should have had a better throw about mind control, because I feel the GrimGriz part of my consciousness Congress making noise back there. But one conceptualization of COVID is obviously particulate. It's a physical virus. It can pass, but whether or not that virus takes up root in us is obviously a much more complex thing. Yet we know that Zoom is COVID safe. We're not passing particles over Zoom. But to your point, Sevilla, value is being transmitted via Zoom. And for the materialists, that's part of why materialism and modernity is breaking down. That the other levels, the other dimensions of reality are no longer so easily dismissible, because, when you started this conversation, Grizz, you said, what space are we in now? And it's, it's very Matrix-like. We all just, plop into this little matrix, this little room created by Zoom. And we sort of know how to do it, but we certainly don't know all that's going on in us or between us via this little Zoom matrix we've gathered in. It's not material.
That's what part of what happened to me, and probably a lot of my generation, is like this immaterial playground started being tied to material dollars. I think there's an inversion with monetized and demonetized. So it was monetized, and like this, I'm gonna talk to, like, I'm talking to you right now, and it could bounce off anywhere. Whereas like my influence is limited to Brahms, if that's where I work. So this space, this weirdness is, as long as we still have it, is, I don't know, the way it interacts with our financial material reality is something that we should probably look at super closely. And that it's designed the way it is to be in service of advertisers is something that, but it's like, why does spam work? Because people keep opening it. And so somehow we have to increase each other's agency to the point that we make better choices and don't just let the beast. Never. This is what I do. There you go, guys. Please talk now. I'm gonna hide.
No, it was excellent. This is.
Okay, I was really just product placement more than hiding.
And part of, you're so right, Grizz, because it was Google more than anyone. I mean, others took a stab at it, but nobody colonized the internet for money like Google. Google Google is the one that really succeeded in that. Now, as a pastor, part of it was Rod Hare that really challenged me. He said, you're pastoring on the internet. And I kind of said, I don't really think that can be done. And he's like, I'm not so sure you're right, because that's really what you're trying to do. And it really is what you are doing. And that has to do, I think, again, with this definition of the little corner of the internet, that we see each other. So much of and Sevilla knows this from the whole therapy corner of the world. So much of this is seeing each other. The patient who comes into the office of the therapist, is being seen by the therapist. I'm ready to see you now. I mean, that is actually the language we use. I'm ready to see you now. Pastoral care is not just being seen by the pastor, because of course pastors are very much seen because we're up on stage in front of the congregation. Pastoral care is not just being seen by the pastor, but the wise pastor helps the church to see each other. And so the community becomes a network of seeing and being seen. And I think to the degree that this little corner of the internet will bring healing to people and everybody needs healing, will bring healing to people, is the degree to which people are seen and seen and loved and being loved. And if that can happen in this strange Zoom matrix, well, that's a good thing. Now, there's going to be distortions in it, and that's the difficult thing, and that probably some of those distortions will not be able to be compensated for or eliminated. But we're at a place where something sometimes is better than nothing.
Well, Paul, I think it's interesting what you just said, because I've, especially after Thunder Bay, I really got the sense that a lot of your role in this internet is giving it kind of giving it the social personality, like, because you understand how disparate, people from all walks of life can come together in community, not just because everyone is looking at the same direction, upward direction, but also on a much more grounded level, like a day-to-day reality, that people, how people spend their time with each other and how actual social interaction works. Like, that's why, you can have the Freddie and Paul show and it's brilliant, and then you can go talk to some highfalutin academic type, and it's just and you're treating both people in the same way, really. And I think that is the personality that is part of this corner, and that's a big part of your contribution. Is that sensibility that we are seeing, we are listening, we are getting to know each other in a very open, dynamic way that Persig would say is the way to meet people in the world is without preconditions. I mean, in this new book with Persig, there's very much more underlying Zen approach than I realized. And that is that open stance of non-judgment. And you're an extremely non-judgmental person with other people. I've never gotten the impression that you even have, I could never say, well, this is Paul Vander Klay's politics, because I don't know, because that's how non-judgmental you are.
And I appreciate, Griz's attention to the fourth wall.
Yeah.
Because that is really huge here. And, one of the early critiques that John had about Jordan, I think, had everything to do with the fourth wall. And I think actually Jordan has gotten a lot better on that score over the last few years in terms of, even just the way he brought Peugeot into the conversation with Mohammed Hijab, and
that was something.
I was just ready for John Peugeot to start blinking out SOS with his eyes. There's a boomer reference. You can search that one on the internet. But but and again, back to the spiritual gifts thing. People aren't going to like Sam's Unitarianism. People aren't going to like Jacob's crusade against the Apostle Paul. People aren't going to like GrimGriz's conspiratorial ethos, but all of these things have their place. It's very much an Ephesians 3, not Ephesians, but Ecclesiastes 3. There's a time and every purpose under heaven for these things and these seasons, which is something that Peugeot really taught me well in terms of his talk about the center and the fringe and how, reality lays itself out in this way.
Narrative space. The space you are when you read a book, the space you are when you're online by yourself, is somehow it allows me to be in that space while in conversation with you in a way that's impossible when you're in the room with me. The way we relate to other physical people in reality, I can say more to you people now because you're on the internet than I can to, and it does cross. I've met people from the internet after, but it's like there's this weird vulnerable honesty of the narrative space that is really tricky to share in physical reality, but we do all seem to share it here, and that's gotta be a danger. But sorry.
I think that's super true. And so, this summer I had, first in Chicago and then a little bit at Synod, actually, because I've mentioned to a number of people, I had a fair number of pastors come to me like Nicodemus came to Jesus, because they don't want to come out and talk to Paul Vander. Vidonk and I did an event about estuary that almost nobody came to. But a lot of pastors would sort of sidle up to me quietly and, tell me more about this thing that you're doing on the internet. But don't let anybody, don't let anybody know we're talking. But I think, boy, Grizz, that's a huge insight that you just gave us. And you could feel that with how many meetings in Chicago and then Germany and the Netherlands and the UK and then Thunder Bay. On one hand, there's a sort of reunion spirit to it where, I've had a conversation with you online. And once I, I've talked to a lot of people, my Dunbar number's been exploded. So, okay, yeah. And so then you start to put them together, and there's a hierarchy there, which again, and I wrestle with. But then you also begin to realize that unlike, let's say, friendships that I developed in grade school or high school or college, there's a lack of contextuality to the relationship because it was birthed in this narrative space. And so, maybe something will help it sort of flourish and grow out into other areas, or maybe it won't. And I think that's a really key insight that I've actually never thought of, that because I would have liked to have imagined that if it were given the opportunity to grow and meet its potential, it would. But part of the reality, again, this is part of my argument. It's kind of an ontological argument for the existence of the afterlife, is that none of us have enough time. There's insufficient potential in this dispensation for relationships to actually pursue that potential. We all have 24 hours in a day. We all have a third of that is spent sleeping and eating, etc. We're all limited by time and space. There's a bunch of things we have to do in the real world to make all of this stuff work. And so in that sense, you know, in the next life, in the afterlife, I see more potentiality for relationship. But part of what we're sensing with even this strange little tool is that there's greater potentiality in some of this narrative space that we didn't have before, because I haven't written a book and I don't write fiction. So I think that's a really helpful insight.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting it that I'd never thought of.
It's it came to mind because something. It was a couple of weeks now, and it slipped. I have it. It's I think still on my slogan board. You went into skin in the game. I think right before you came back from Thunder Bay, and this I've come to this thing on orientation is like, okay, if this is a Gnostic hell and you want to escape, then that's one orientation. And if this is a Gnostic hell and you're here to get a pearl, that's another orientation. And then if you're here to make this return to Eden, you're part of the redemption of the fallen world to make it return to Eden, then that's another one. But as long as you're just evaluating your position from the map holding narrative space, then it doesn't matter what you figured out. And that I think one of the things that I'm hoping, I'm meeting with your estuary leaders. I think 4 or 5 Grail countries got together for me tonight.
Oh, wonderful.
And like I'm gonna see if I can't beholder that. Like what are these estuary leaders hearing from the ground? The people that are meeting together in the flesh with real life problems. What of those can bubble up to be addressed by this hive mind corner thought thing? But that you have to actually put skin in the game, and the execution and getting out of narrative space is a real. That's the edge of my cognition these days.
Well, I like the way you use skin in the game versus, because I think that you were talking before about how problematic, or at least implying how problematic the profit motive is, of the internet itself, of these platforms. And I think that if you can see how something develops without that even being a consideration, obviously if people have Patreons on their YouTube channels, that's fine, or whatever, or selling merchandise. But there isn't anyone in this corner who is primarily focused on making a living doing this, at least not explicitly. And that really makes a huge difference in the way that, let's just say the narrative evolves. Because you could say that this is a narrative that is evolving from the mutual hive mind, in this corner, desire for some kind of clarity or some kind of, and I have to be ambiguous about this because we don't even really know where this is going. But to see the story unfold in this corner, where, like, again, like people who are quite religious begin to embrace science, for example, and things like that happening that are just kind of unfolding and growing, and then that these connections are made, and suddenly, suddenly John Vervaeke's on Lex Friedman. so it's fascinating.
I think there's a directionality in the world that it's seeking. It's interesting that this word consummation is in eschatology, consummation is the second coming of Jesus Christ, which means that the story becomes enfleshed again in this world order. And of course, in Christianity, that's an echo from the first. And the virgin birth, for all people's skepticism about it, in the narrative structure, is again, it's a recreation in some ways, and the story folds out in this way. The fact that we've had, in the Bridges of Meaning Discord, we've had 2 or more weddings, and now children coming through. I mean, in a strange way, those children are icons of that directionality towards consummation. And again, we use that in terms of a marriage. They consummated the marriage. We use that in terms of eschatology. That's the consummation where Jesus in his flesh once again inhabits this same objective material reality, to use Mark Lefevre and Navigating Patterns phrase. And I think, part of what I hear through you, Grizz, is a longing for consummation in that sense. I mean, in some ways, Thunder Bay was a consummation moment of this little corner,
Mm-hmm.
because we were all together in one space. It's not a final consummation, but it was a consummating moment. And there is you see this in the LARPing of people who dress up like their favorite movie characters when they go to Star Wars or Rocky Horror Picture Show or Harry Potter or some big fandom that they long to inhabit. And I think it's that pulling together of flesh and spirit that, that's the reality we're longing for. And I think this little corner is moving in that way, perhaps maybe not so self-consciously, but definitely moving towards that in I think a very Christological direction.
Well, I'm gonna throw down some heresy in a minute because of all that you gave my channel. But I want to say that for me, that's a result of the lack of a species level telos beyond shut up and make money. I think in this corner, people are finding like the re-enchantment of family, for starters. The whole recognition that I don't want to be turned into a consumer. I don't want to be the best consumer I can be. Like in some systems, like this is the only life you have. And like that's when it's like if you're in reincarnation, spending an incarnation and playing video games, eating Cheetos isn't that big of a deal. But if this is the only one you have, then help me be better with it, my brothers. But the heresy I promised. Like what? What if the second coming of Christ is like a fractal up of his first time being here, and like the men just follow the way and go fast in the desert for 40 days and come back, and like if he's in everyone's heart, then that's a consummation I can get behind. Like heretical or not, it's like okay, so they say the word was at the beginning with God, and then Pajot's doing this whole like he keeps saying the perfect glass, but really he means Jesus, and like they say there's the saying that God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son, but if the word was with God at the beginning, then God so loved the world that he made the world for him to go be a superhero in. Okay, that's enough heresy. I'm sorry.
No, one of my favorite, the best Willy Wonka movie is the Gene Wilder movie. And that movie, all heresies are in some way like the foolish children in the Gene Wilder Willy Wonka movie, in that they all sell short. So instead of hanging on to own the chocolate factory, they they sell their inheritance for lesser subcategories of the kingdom of the chocolate factory. And now even Charlie does this, and it's important to remember, because even Charlie is a sinner and a heretic, but for some reason Charlie comes through to inherit the kingdom. And I I think it's part of what I am unwilling to settle for is anything less than everything. And I think that's the challenging journey of orthodoxy, to settle for nothing less than everything. So to imagine that, well, via this little cyberspace we can achieve a degree of embodiment together in this little space. Well, that's cool, but I want more. And to think that we can really enjoy little snippets of relationships in this way, well, that's cool, but I want more. And I think that's where consummation is always the desire for moreness. And for example, C.S. Lewis's great little book in the Narnia series, The Last Battle, it's the fact that God is going to give us more, and when we think we can't take it anymore, he's going to give us more still, as well as the capacity to take that moreness that he is ready to give us. And that's and so part of me just doesn't want to settle. And so I think that's part of what keeps me orthodox, because I think, okay, let's enjoy communion together here now. That's a blessed, wonderful thing, but I still want more. And I'm only going to have 80, 90, 100 years of life. Who knows? Maybe my father died at 77. My sister died at 53. I mean, if there's no longer homeroom the next morning, GrimGriz is going to start emailing me and say, is Pastor Vander Klay okay, or is there some news we need to know? And there'll be no further transmissions. But part of this longing for the kingdom is sort of going to God, like the persistent widow in Luke 18, and grabbing on and saying, no, I'm not satisfied. I still want more, and you're going to give it to me. And I think that actually, when you read what Jesus talks about faith in the Gospels, there's a lot of that in there. It's going to God and saying, you can do better than what you've given us so far. Yeah, these are good things, but you can do better, and I'm not going to rest with you until you finally give me absolutely everything that you are and have. And he'll be like, are you ready? You can't take it all, Paul. I'll give you a little bit more, kind of like Moses in the cleft of the rock. So, and I understand why people in this world get discouraged, but that's my position on heresy and orthodoxy.
Okay.
Well, Paul, I really like that, because it's been put so simply lately. We know this, and I'm going to go back again to what Griz said about money. I was listening to Jonathan Pajot in that talk. He, with that, it's a motivational speaker fellow, Aubrey something.
Yeah.
The Aubrey Marcus fella.
and Jonathan just said it. He said, we can't worship, our focus of worship can't be money. Otherwise, this is what we get. It's very simple. We all know it. And yet we don't really think about it. And this moreness that you're talking about, this compulsion towards the moreness has been hijacked. And the moreness at the top is being the richest person in the world, right? This is what it is motivating almost everyone tacitly, right? Because this is what our society is promoting, without really putting it out there. And this moreness that you're talking about is that compulsion not tainted by this lower form, this lower idol, let's just say. And that we all have that. And maybe, like, one thing that really has enlightened me in this corner, John Vervaeke used, several people have used this word that I had not thought about before, is wisdom. So if we are going towards, being one with God, or if we're going towards the imitation of Christ, or if we are going towards the pursuit of wisdom, like pure wisdom, a person would say they were very related. I think you would, at least, maybe someone would. But to me, that those are all something that, regardless of what lens we're looking at it, these are the highest values. And if this corner is kind of giving us a sensibility as to how to begin to do that without having a place to go for wisdom, like John Vervaeke says, then isn't that a wonderful thing?
You sure like up the value of this particular conversation with your memento mori over there, Paul. But honestly, this is history. I don't know how much different this is from Socrates giving a lecture. I mean, who knows what lives any of this will touch? And that's the moreness versus the money. Like, I honestly, like, if somebody said, "Would you like 50 grand?" But in order for you to have 50 grand, Thunder Bay couldn't have happened. Like, that never happened. I personally, even though I could sure use it, and some of us are trying to get by on what they make on the internet. No, I'm more glad Thunder Bay happened, because like the moreness of you and John and Peugeot and the new fella in the room together, like, just the part of that was there that's not available here, and that it happened, and that it got to touch the lives of that many people, that ripple was worth. So I don't know, it's something I've come to appreciate. Once you lose everything, it's a lot easier to appreciate what really matters. So I recommend it, folks.
Yeah. When I was in the DR, there was a guy, an American, who was living in the little town where I was living, and he had this plan where he was going to put in cement floors. And so in the DR, they kind of invade land to get land, and then they put up a little shack. It's sort of, it's kind of like homelessness, but a little different. So they put up a little shack, and there's no cement floor. And if you can get a cement floor in that little shack, life in the shack is a lot better. And so his plan was, he came to the DR and he was going to help these people put in cement floors. And the scheme was that he would put in the floor, and then they would pay him back over time. And the money that they paid him back, he would then turn around and put that money back into cement floors in other people's houses. And so that way, everybody in that little invasion community would have a cement floor. And I lived there long enough that I looked at him. I said, your scheme isn't going to work. No Dominican is going to pay you back after you put the cement floor in his house, because you're a rich American. He's going to think he doesn't need the money. I'm not going to give him a dime, and I need the money because I'm desperately poor. And the guy said to me, he said, look, I was a contractor in America, and I made $1 million and I lost $1 million. And after I lost $1 million, I realized it was only $1 million. It was only money. And after you made $1 million and lost $1 million, money just never had a hold on me. So if all of these people take all my money, I'm totally good with that. And I said, all right. And that's exactly what happened.
But now all those guys have floors.
And now all those guys have floors. And he ran out of money, and so moved back to America and did more contracting. And, he didn't mind it at all. And that's right. And that's, in that way, sort of the illusion of money You know, in some ways, the money illusion most desperately grips the poor, which is a real cruelty. Whereas someone like Trump or Musk or Bezos, you know, it's just money. You know, I think of that. I think of that story that Trump's daughter talked about, where they were leaving Trump Tower, and there was a beggar on the street, and Trump says to his daughter, "That guy has more money than I do." What do you mean? You know, I'm in debt. You know, millions and millions of dollars. I mean, net worth is negative. The guy on the street, he doesn't have any debt. You know, he might have $5 in his pocket. He's got more than Trump. It's just, the world is like that. What a strange thing.
Well, I'm going to end this now because that's how I do.
That is indeed how you do.
Money is a strange thing, and if you have extra, I have a paycheck. Remember, everybody, there is no agency. We want what's best for you. I don't know how much of the onboarding help this was, but I think this is going to be a treat for everybody who's at least already in the corner. And I thank you both very much for your time. It was a true honor.
Thank you, Chris, for getting us together. I really appreciate it. Great to see you again, Paul.
Oh, it's great to see you, Sevilla.
Bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.